This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Today I'll be talking about the connections between the illiterate and the theologian. And essentially, well, this is not very... it's not a new argument that's been made. This is been done already in early modern Europe, but the consequences of applying some of the findings of Renaissance scholars to Spanish America and the Spanish Empire might be quite striking, actually. Largely because the Black legend has somehow managed to isolate the Spanish monarchy from the rest of the globe and the rest of Europe somehow. So I'll be reading off a script, but also showing images, trying to let me see if it follows. Yeah. Okay. To combine both. So the dependency of the learned on the humble, weak, and allegedly ignorant was a fundamental feature of the early modern Catholic global world in general, and the Iberian monarchies in particular. The history of prophecy in early modern Iberia is one characterized by the extraordinary authority of popular prophetesses and occasional popular male prophets. The extraordinary authority popular prophetesses held over lay and ecclesiastical rulers. The whole notion of the court prophet in early modern Renaissance Europe has been well studied, particularly in Italy. We have several examples of this type of visionary women who are courted by princesses and countesses, and the learned, and everybody kind of hovers around these women, and they take down everything they say in writing. And we have here, for instance, some cases of these type of popular prophets in Italy in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. The case of La Beata Colomba de Rieto in Perugia is one case, Vita della Beata Colomba de Rieto, in which they describe how these women of very humble origins and illiterate all of a sudden becomes the center of Perugian court life in the late 15th century. This is a hagiography written posthumously in 1520. This is also the case of Caterina de Bologna, another illiterate beata whose views and prophecies were kind of put down in writing by theologians, and she had a following among the most powerful elites of Bologna, particularly lay elites, but also the church, archbishops, bishops. In the case of Caterina de Bologna, no, this is not Caterina de Bologna, but in other cases, even the Pope, they would become confessors of the Pope, and the Pope would kind of follow whatever advice these women would give him, court prophets. Lucia de Narni, another case in these late 15th, early 16th century, Italian urban renaissance. This is happening in many cities, in many cases. La Vita della Beata Ossana in Mantova is another case of another popular prophet, surrounded by all these powerful princesses that are kind of paying attention to the prophecies, and these women who held a great authority and great power over these courts. This is also the case in Spain. The Cardinal Cisneros, for instance, the highest authority there was in Spain in the late 15th century and early 16th century, would have also a stable of these prophets, popular prophets, who would be financed and taken care of by Cisneros. One of them is the case of Angela Ruggiero, whom Cisneros listened very carefully. Another is Juana de la Cruz, another of the prophets in the stable of Cisneros. Again, the relationship between these women and Cisneros is not Cisneros acting as a confessor and telling them what to do. Is the opposite. It's these women telling Cisneros what to do, and we need to keep that in mind. Another case, I'll come back to this case because this is the most extraordinary case, perhaps, of the power of the popular prophet in a society, and is the case of the cobbler, the shoemaker of Bandarra in the mid-16th century in Portugal, who became the prophet of Portugal throughout the 17th century and framed every single intellectual debate of any import in Portugal, particularly in the restoration of the Braganza after 1640. He became one of the most important prophets in the land, no doubt as important or even more so than any of the prophets of the Old Testament and the Gospels even. So, with that in mind, let's turn to the case of the Iberian monarchies. There was great suspicion among elites that popular prophets could be lying, or worse, be the instruments of demons. Nevertheless, once the prophetess was determined to be truly speaking for God, her authority would be unparalleled. Prophetesses were courted by lay and ecclesiastical authorities for insights. Prophetesses' visions would be carefully transcribed and interpreted by the learned, and their voice listened to with awe and respect. The dynamic between learned elite and popular prophetess was driven by a shared culture of what prophecy should look like. The successful popular prophetess or prophet, there were a few males, and we could discuss why males were not as common as females, why females had more authority than males, but there were a few males. The successful popular prophetess was one whose voice would resemble the parables and visions of the major and minor prophets of the Old Testament, like say Jeremiah, Isaiah, Daniel, Deborah, Amos, or Obadiah. There are 16 of them in the Old Testament. The humble and allegedly illiterate were schooled in the biblical genres and traditions of the learned, and would deliver their visions by deliberately echoing Old Testament and Revelation tropes. So these were illiterate individuals who were rather well acquainted with the Old Testament and would be able to mimic the structure of prophets of the major and minor prophets of the Old Testament. And the closer they got to that structure, the more authority they had, and the more believable they became, and the more interest on the part of the theologians they could engender. The learned, in turn, would identify those echoes and would seek to make explicit the parallels through transcription and interpretation in an endless, self-fulfilling hermeneutical cycle. There are a few cases that are well studied. I'm going to present one. The case of Lucrecia de Leon is illuminating. Lucrecia grew to become a prophetess of great repute in Madrid in the 1580s, denouncing the impending end of Philip's II Habsburg regime and predicting the Armada's defeat of the coast of England a few years before that happened. When she was imprisoned by the Inquisition in 1590, Lucrecia was a 21-year-old single woman, more concerned with finding a proper suitor than following spiritual pursuits. Yet this daughter of a modest paralegal at the service of the Genovese bankers in Madrid became a powerful and revered seer. Her dreams created panic among leading courtiers who, fearful of her predictions of foreign invasions, had shelters built and food and guns gathered to prepare for the aftermath. Among Lucrezia's followers was Hernando de Toledo, head of one of Spain's most prestigious religious military orders, and member of the Council of State, who wore scapulars with a cross design that had appeared in one of Lucrezia's dreams. She's the subject of Richard Kagan's book, Lucrezia's Dreams. The young Lucrezia grew in a Madrid teeming with popular prophets, beatas like Juana Correa, from whom Lucrezia picked up knowledge of mystical visions, soldiers of fortune and veterans of the European wars like Martín de Piedrola, from whom Lucrezia acquired followers, the homeless and mentally ill like Juan de Dios, reputed royal prophet or court prophet, and Second John the Baptist, from whom Lucrezia learned about the visions of the Toledan prophetess Francisca de los Apóstoles. New World returnees like Guillén de Casaus, a family friend and former governor of Yucatan, from whom Lucrezia learned astrology. And willing neighbors like the dry cleaner Martín de Ayala, from whom Lucrezia absorbed the prophecies of María de la Visitación. I'll go back on María de la Visitación later because she's a very interesting case. Lucrezia was literate, and there is evidence that she even read Latin, even though she presented herself as illiterate. As the correspondence she exchanged with Diego de Vítores while in prison suggests, Vítores was the learned secretary hired in 1587 by the head of the Franciscans in Madrid, Fray Lucas de Allende, to transcribe Lucrezia's visions. Soon afterwards, she became Lucrezia's lover and the father of Lucrezia's out-of-wedlock child. That the prominent Allende, the provincial Franciscans, sought to transcribe Lucrezia's every utterance is itself curious. Even more curious is that a member of Toledo's cathedral chapter, Dr. Alonso de Mendoza, was also transfixed with the late adolescent's dreams. He would peregrinate to Madrid repeatedly to visit Lucrezia to serve as her amanuensis. Mendoza belonged to one of Spain's most powerful families and was a theologian of distinction. Lucrezia, Vítores, Allende, and Mendoza established an hermeneutical cycle in which Lucrezia delivered dreams that resembled the structure of Old Testament and Revelation prophecies. The transcribers, in turn, would then make those resemblances explicit through learned theological interpretation in a self-fulfilling hermeneutical cycle that helped to consolidate and enhance Lucrezia's authority. Lucrezia would implicitly draw on the prophecies of Daniel, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Esdras, while Allende and Mendoza would marvel at the similarities, the similitudes, and would grow ever more confident on the authority of Lucrezia's visions. The career of Lucrezia resembles that of her contemporary in Madrid, Martín de Piedrola, an Navarran veteran of the Flemish and Italian wars. Piedrola's vision cast Philip II as a tyrant. The aristocratic courtly circle that supported Piedrola also supported Lucrezia. Learned theologians transcribed and interpreted Piedrola's prophecies, much like they had done for Lucrezia. They found the prophecies authoritative and credible, for they resembled those of Isaiah and Jerome. Piedrola himself would draw attention to his resemblances to Elijah and Malachi while preaching in the public square. Piedrola's authority within learned and aristocratic circles rested on his alleged illiteracy. Every one of them would cast themselves as illiterate. And yet he had an obvious knowledge of the Bible. It was assumed he had miraculously memorized every sentence in the Bible. Piedrola's authority was such that he became a trusted acolyte, familiar of the Inquisitor General himself, Archbishop of Toledo and Cardinal Gaspar de Quiroga. The Cortes of Castile established a commission to evaluate Piedrola's prophecies and the benefit of appointing Piedrola as a national prophet, a new post to be created just for him. A reluctant Philip II relented and appointed the general inquisitor, the royal confessor, and the royal almoner to gather the testimony of leading theological experts so they could pass final judgment on whether to appoint Pietro as national prophet. Contradictory evidence collected by these three prelates forced the Inquisition to take over. Piedrola was arrested. It was the Franciscan Allende and the Canon Mendoza, later interpreters of Lucretius' dream, who spearheaded a campaign to set Piedrola free. Mendoza would present Piedrola to the Roman Curia as a modern Daniel cast by Darius into the lion's den, namely Philip II. Another contemporary of Lucrezia and Piedrola reveals yet another surprising aspect of their hermeneutical cycle that tied the learned to the illiterate, namely the authority of the body as prophetic text. Her name was Maria de la Visitación, the nun of Lisbon. If Lucrezia baffled and tantalized the learned with her dreams, Maria stunned them with her body. Maria's followers included not only the Archbishop of Lisbon, Miguel de Noronha, the Franciscan Provincial of Portugal, Fray Antonio de la Cerda, the royal preacher, Fray Gaspar Leitón, and the royal confessor of the former regent, Cardinal Henry, Fray Pedro Samer. The very viceroy of Portugal, Cardinal Prince Albert of Austria, also piously followed her. So here, the top authorities of the land are followers of Maria de la Visitación. It was Cardinal Prince Albert himself who in 1584 opened a brief before Pope Gregory XIII. His mission was to document the case of Maria, the prioress of the Dominican convent of the Annunciation, as the most extraordinary ever saint of the church. This woman had been loved by Christ so much that her body and Christ's had become one, was the argument presented to the Pope by Cardinal Prince Albert, Viceroy of Portugal. After visiting the nun in the convent, accompanied by the Inquisitor General, Albert was left overwhelmed by piety. He witnessed a nun who, like St. Francis, shared with Christ the wounds of the cross. Unlike St. Francis' stigmata, however, Maria's wounds on her hands and her feet sprouted the nails of the cross. She would experience increasing pain on her wounds beginning on Wednesday, the day Christ's passion actually began, until Friday noon, when Christ died at the cross every week. Every Friday at noon, she would shed 5 drops from the wound below her heart. Small pieces of cloth would be pressed over the bleeding wound. Perfect red crosses would surface upon the cloth's face. Dozens of these engravings, and that is the term used by the documents, were treated as relics and circulated in Christendom from Rome to Venice, from Goa to Japan. These relics cured the ill, converted Muslim galley slaves, and saved several ships from shipwrecks, particularly off the Barbary coast. Maria de la Visitación's bodily transformation took years to unfold. It began in 1575 with the miraculous appearance of the scars of Christ's crown of thorns around Maria's head. In 1578, Christ miraculously transferred a copy of his lance wound onto her chest. In 1584, she turned 33, the age of Christ, and Christ appeared to carve out a stigmata into her hands and feet, nails included. In 1585, she had a vision of Christ pouring a pint of his blood over her body. The blood miraculously became a crimson tunic, identical to the one Pontius Pilate gave the condemned Christ. Maria wore the tunic ever since, but it was invisible to everyone except those who would join her into rapture. The Archbishop of Lisbon, Noronha, the Franciscan Provincial Cerda, and her confessor, Fray Pedro Romero, testified to the Inquisition about their shared vision of her invisible role when the three joined her in prayer. A steady stream of theologians would trek from all over Castile and Andalusia to see her in Lisbon. The correspondence between Lisbon and Rome thickened. Publications of these letters began to appear in Latin, Italian, and French. The Dominican Luis de Granada was the learned man who closely followed the changes and visions of María de la Visitación. María had her own confessor, Fray Pedro Romero, with whom she corresponded. Romero, however, considered he did not have the knowledge to make sense of the unfolding dramatic bodily transformations. Since the great theologian Granada had moved to Lisbon in 1555, Romero asked Granada to help. In his unpublished Historia of María de la Visitación, Granada explained how the communication between the three of them happened. María would originally put her visions in writing, but because holding a pen in her lacerated hand was so painful, Romero was forced to act as her amanuensis. Granada would interpret the case through Maria's own writing, Romero's transcriptions, and direct conversations with the nun. Yet Granada was not really interested in the content of her visions. Granada sought to make explicit the mystery of salvation through Maria's prophetic body as a text, not her writings. Granada struggled to make sense of what transpired in the Dominican nunnery of the Annunciación. Most of Maria's visions consisted of long conversations not only with Christ himself, but also with the Virgin Mary, John the Baptist, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, Mary Magdalene, and hundreds of other saints. Sometimes Maria would spend entire days in catatonic rapture, engaged in long dialogues with the diverse members of the heavenly court. Granada did not have much curiosity for the content of these exchanges, which is curious because that was the substance of most of the dialogue between confessors and beatas and nuns, the content of the visions. But in his case, he's not interested in the conversations that Maria had with these hundreds of saints, even Mary and Christ. He focused his attention on the visions that allowed Maria's body to gradually become one with Christ's, the moment in which Maria would receive from Christ the crown of thorns, the stigmata, and the robe. Key to the transformation was Maria's almost daily consumption of the Eucharist. In the rare occasions in which the Corpus Christi was denied to her, the host would still miraculously move in the air from sealed monstrances and tabernacles directly into her mouth. Granada would carefully describe the loving relations between an all-powerful deity, Christ, and his lowly creature, Maria, to elucidate the nature of imperial mercy as well as the role of the human body in sin and salvation. So this is a kind of a treatise on political philosophy, but also on Christology. Christ modeled what a great monarch needed to do by making time to hear the cries of the weak and dispensing his mercy and grace, even if the weak in question were quasi-adolescent females. To gain access to Christ, on the other hand, Maria had to overcome all her bodily desires as well as the innate sinfulness of her soul. As she cleansed herself through rigorous fasting and bodily punishments, both her soul and body would change. Not only her soul, but body would change as well. By tracing the gradual transformation of Maria's body, Granada illuminated the mysteries of both the fall and salvation. According to Granada, Christ had come not only to save the soul of the living and the dead from original sin and imprisonment in hell, but also the body of humans from eternal death. Resurrection was a promise of future bodily life. Maria's process of cleansing was a reminder that not only her soul, but also her body had crossed a threshold. Her sanctified body was now capable of curing the degenerated and corrupted bodies of commoners. So she became a living relic. Granada would describe the many miracles of her body. Her laying of hands would cure the ill. Her bleeding patches would convert the Muslim. Even the waste waters of her washings would circulate as relics to prevent shipwrecks during the storms. So there are many cases of crews throwing overboard these washings in order to calm nature and quiet the storms. But why a Christ-like saint like Maria, who superseded even St. Francis and Catherine of Siena, had appeared in Christendom when she did? Why so late? Why now? Why not before? Granada believed that Maria's body was a prophetic text that spoke to momentous events. It was God's voice of supporting the church's struggle against the reformed heretics. According to Granada, God sent prophets in times of great crisis. Maria was the modern equivalent of David, Micaiah, and Josiah. For Granada, the import of Maria lay in her body more than in her visions. The miracle of her transformation was the equivalent of the miracles God performed as he communicated through Moses, Joshua, Isaiah, Elijah, Eliseo, Daniel, and Tobias, as well as apostles, San Francisco, St. Dominic, St. Pereira, and Catherine of Siena in the Age of Grace. The Portuguese provincial of the Franciscans, de la Cerda, would insist in his correspondence with the Roman Curia that God spoke to Maria in the same way that he once did to Jeremiah and Moses. According to Granada, God had used Maria de la Visitación as a text to intervene publicly in the momentous confessional dispute. First, God treated Maria as his canvas by imprinting the stigmata on her body. God was a publisher, a printmaker. God then deployed Maria's clawed relics themselves. They deployed Maria's clawed relics themselves in great canvases to spread knowledge of Christ's sacrifice and the mysteries of redemption and salvation. So God was aware of the public sphere as well. Finally, God prompted the exchanges of letters between Prince Albert and the Pope, as well as the public investigations to the Inquisition, to spread his word even further. According to Granada, God knew the power of print and of the public sphere in transforming a private revelation into a significant event in Christendom. So these are categories that Granada is creating himself: the public of letters, public sphere, print culture. He's using those categories that will eventually become kind of the staple of the Enlightenment. This is 1580, 1590. And yet Maria refused to follow God's script as ascribed by Granada. She considered that she had more than her body to offer to Portugal. Sometime after all the attention brought on her by the visits of Cardinal Prince Albert, Maria began to have prophetic visions unrelated to the transformation of her sanctified body. Maria began to denounce Philip's II tyranny. She joined others in Portugal in support of the cause of Philip's rival, Dom Antonio Priorocrato, who, despite having lost battles in Lisbon and Tenerife, and despite his exile to Paris and London, remained a threat to Habsburg rule in Portugal. Philip II ordered the awestruck Cardinal Prince Albert to immediately initiate an investigation, yet another, because the first one, in which Granada participated, actually reinforced Maria as God's text. Philip II, a junta of great theologians and inquisitors went to the nunnery to give Maria a closer look. With the help of other nuns, who until then had only sung her praises, the commission found that Maria's stigmata would be washed out through robust scrubbing. She was found a fraud, and her prophetic visions of Philip II a trickery. The guilty Maria was demoted and sent to another nearby convent to be cloistered and ritually humiliated at every communal meal for the rest of her life. And that is the end of Maria. Studying the relationship between the learned, Granada, and the popular prophet, Maria de la Visitación, is important because it exposes alternative early modern discourses of literacy and print culture. The story of Maria de la Visitación sheds light on a peculiar early modern understanding of the public sphere. God was deemed a publicist who, through printed hagiographies and the body of saints as text, reached out to the larger community of the pious. The life of another popular prophet in Mexico, Gregorio López, a contemporary of Lucrecia, Piedra and Maria de la Visitación, exposes yet another case of alternative early modern Catholic conceptions of literacy and print culture. Well, a contemporary of all these guys is this cobbler shoemaker of Bandarra, who came up with these prophecies in the mid-16th century, 1540s, 1550s. He was tried by the Inquisition the same way that Maria de la Visitación, and then given a light sentence, but his prophecies by 1603 had become central to Braganza or Portuguese resistance to Habsburg rule in Portugal. And the first one to put in print the trovas, these are verses in which Bandarra, the shoemaker of Bandarra, Gunes de Alves, express his prophecies were printed by Joan de Castro, one of the followers of Alberto, the alternative to Philip II, the prior of Crato. So this is in that context is that the prophecies of Bandarra came into print and circulation in Europe. This came out in Paris in 1603, when Bandarra was creating the first texts on Sebastianism, the return of Sebastian to the throne, an alternative to to the prior of Crato. The prior of Crato had been defeated finally by Philip II and completely isolated in Paris and London, and that is when Sebastianism comes of age in Portugal, always connected to the Trovas of Bandarra. And then there are all these texts that begin to emerge afterwards. This one in 1624 on prophecies, Sebastianism, and who is going to take over Portugal after the Habsburgs are defeated. There are literally dozens of these texts produced in the 17th century. But the point is that at the core, at the center of all these texts on the restoration of the Braganza, the restoration of Portuguese dynasty, the independence of Portugal from the Spanish monarchy, have these prophecies of Bandarra at the center. Well, I could keep on going. There are many of these examples, and the way Bandarra becomes a source, a prophet that held even more authority than any of the Old Testament prophets, and even similar authority as the Gospels of the New Testament. It's truly striking. So let's turn to Lopez. These are all contemporaries. Lopez lived for some 33 years as a hermit in the Mexican wilderness, with very limited access to books and no schooling or knowledge of Latin. He nevertheless managed to produce an extraordinary book of commentaries on the Apocalypse, a text of Materia Medica, and a lost treatise on chronology and universal history, along with a Mappa Mundi and a globe. So here are the outputs of Gregorio Lopez. Not only his commentary on the Apocalypse, that is an interpretation of the book of Revelation, Biblia Sacra, the Apocalypse here, his treatise on medicine, but also a globe as a reflection of his knowledge, his wide knowledge on every and all subjects. This strange hermit developed a huge following among the leading theologians of New Spain. The most learned Franciscans, Dominicans, and Jesuits of the land would peregrinate to Lopez's hermitages to contemplate his frail body and parsimonious speech, while peppering Lopez with questions on biblical commentary, theology, church history, astrology, mathematics, and chronology. This idiot, and that is the way most sources refer to him, given Lopez's lack of learning and Latin, became a living saint whose every utterance was parsed out for meaning. He was kind of what is the name, the term for peace? autist. He would almost, he would remain silent most of the time. He would be on his own, would not socialize, but every time he would utter a word, somebody would take down that word and try to come up with a deeper meaning for that utterance. After his fame in the northern Chichimec frontier group, the Archbishop of Mexico, Pedro Moya de Contreras, assigned Father Francisco Loza, member of the cathedral chapter, to be Lopez's caregiver and secretary. Again, this relationship between the prophet and a learned man would become an amanuensis, a secretary. Loza would follow Lopez around for the next 20 years. Loza quit his job in the capital to live in the nearby town of Santa Fe with Lopez the last 7 years of the hermit's life, ushering learned visitors into Lopez's quarters and recording Lopez's acts. When the hermit died in 1596, Lopez's few possessions were dispersed as relics. In 1616, the Archbishop of Mexico, Juan Pérez de la Serna, had Lopez's corpse removed from Santa Fe to the Descalz Carmelite convent Serna had just created. As Lopez's body was placed in a box in the convent's altar, Serna would give 2 of Lopez's bones as gifts to the Viceroy Marqués de Salinas. The hermit's body, however, kept on moving. In 1636, Archbishop Francisco Manso y Zúñiga relocated the mutilated bones into Mexico's cathedral, not before first taking Lopez's skull. The saint's head was to travel as relic with Manso y Zúñiga to the Cathedral of Burgos, the latter's new see. As the hermit acquired the prestige of saint among the pious, his life as an idiot became an intense focus of meditation for the learned. In 1613, Loza published in Mexico a hagiography of the supernatural learning abilities of where is Loza's text? This is Loza's text, La vida que hizo el siervo de Dios Gregorio López en algunos lugares de esta Nueva España, published in Mexico in 1613. Loza published in Mexico a hagiography of the supernatural learning abilities of the hermit that was reprinted several times over the course of the 17th and 18th centuries and translated into Portuguese and French. The hagiography moved Philip III in 1620 to order the Archbishop of Mexico, Serna, to initiate a dossier on Lopez to lobby for the hermit's canonization in Rome. This is an initiative taken by Philip III himself. Philip III also ordered Serna to find all of Lopez's writings. By 1622, Serna had debriefed dozens of witnesses, including the current bishops of Tlaxcala, Yucatan, Michoacan, and Cebu, Philippines, who had at some point met the hermit. They would peregrinate from different places in Mexico to go and visit the guy to learn from him. Typical of this is the structure of court prophets or popular prophets, which the learned would come to see them to learn from the prophet. The dossier established the ways copies of Lopez's commentaries on the Apocalypse had since 1580 moved all over the empire, from the Philippines to Madrid. So here are copies, extant copies of the writings. This is his interpretation of the Apocalypse. And this is his treatise on Materia Medica, Libro de Remedios de Medicina. Lopez's practical treatise on how to cure some 200 different illnesses, ranging from hemorrhoids to engorged breasts, using herbs, plants, oils, waters, minerals, and soils, Tesoros de Medicina, had ultimately wound up in the royal convent of the Incarnation in Madrid as the Viceroy Salinas present to Queen Margaret of Austria, who left the manuscript to the convent when she had the convent built. This is still there. This is a copy in the Biblioteca Nacional in Madrid. In 1636, Margaret's son, King Philip IV, would personally write the Pope Urban VIII, the Spanish ambassador in Rome, Marquis de Castel Rodrigo, and the powerful Cardinal Barberini, nephew of Urban, soliciting Lopez's canonization and presenting the dossier the Archbishop Serna had gathered the previous decade. Nothing was to come of this initiative, but the cause of the saint was not abandoned. In 1642, a new hagiography appeared in Puebla that included several accounts by the learned bishops who had befriended the saint. The updated hagiography also announced that the powerful learned Archbishop and Viceroy of Mexico, Juan de Palafox y Mendoza, had thrown his weight behind the canonization cause. As part of the lobbying effort in Rome, the top Mexican theologian of the University of Mexico, Joseph Arce Diaz, this is a fascinating text, published in 1648 a treatise on biblical hermeneutics, Opus Studioso Sacrum Bibliorum, addressed to Pope Innocent X. This is the mid-18th century edition in Rome of that treatise published in Mexico in 1648. 100 years later, it's republished. One of the most important treatises on biblical hermeneutics in the Catholic world that was inspired by the life of Lopez. Arce Diaz used the life and writings of Lopez to articulate an epistemology on the proper role of females and non-elite males, including children, in biblical interpretation. Arce Diaz offered a sustained theological argument for the role of popular prophets like Lopez in deepening the understanding of Scripture. Arce Diaz's argument on the reliability and quality of female scriptural learning was to be used by Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz a few years later to justify her own dabblings in theology. We cannot understand Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz outside the context of all these debates, and I think the liberal and feminist readings of Sor Juana Paz and others are completely off the mark. But I'll present a paper on Sor Juana later. I know some over the course of my stint here in London, in which I reinterpret her conversion in light of these texts and others that, in short, her conversion was conversion from a lowly courtier writer of law poems into one of the greatest theologians of the church, Saint Augustine and Santa Teresa de Jesus. So from lowly curiosity, versifier, to a saint. The case of Lopez sheds light, so it has nothing to do with kind of resistance on the part of the church to have a learned woman, as is being usually argued. The case of Lopez sheds light on an early modern path to sanctity that confounds our stereotypes. Lopez was the antithesis of the Counter-Reformation saint. He rarely went to Mass. He spent long periods of his life restoring his health in hospitals where he kept to himself without consoling or attending the poor and the sick. He was very frail, and he spent some years in hospitals all over Mexico to be taken care of, not to take care of anyone. Lopez explicitly and vocally denied ever having exercised active punishment on his body. He also insisted he had never had visions or mystical raptures. He did not access the divine via the Neoplatonic regimented ascent of the soul through heavenly cosmic steps of ever greater cleansing and sporadic ecstasies. I didn't know that. Lopez was in the company of the divine when he engaged in mundane tasks, such as the manual labor he carried out to secure an income, the case of Bandara, Most of the great prophets of Portugal in the 16th and 17th century are all cobblers, tailors, shoemakers, tailors. All of them are zapateiros, or tailors. So Lopez was in the company of the divine when he engaged in mundane tasks, such as the manual labor he carried out to secure an income, given that Lopez did not accept alms. It's a very unusual thing. God was with him when Lopez observed and sustained nature, even when he socialized in conversion with others. God was at his side. All his hagiographers, Francisco Loza, the Mercedarian Alonso Ramon, produced in Madrid in 1630, the cleric Luis Muñoz, published in Puebla in 1643, and the theologian Joseph Arce Diaz, Mexico 1648, dwelt on Lopez's unusual path to sanctity as a form of permanent communication with God. The Augustinian theologian Francisco de Salazar, Bishop of Yucatan, who had often visited Lopez while the hermit lived in Santa Fe, maintained in his deposition to Serna that Lopez was a prophet, not unlike Elijah and Elisha, or Eliseo, constantly in conversation with the divine. Lopez's great learning on biblical scholarship and natural science was supernatural, infused science that came to the hermit via the constant presence of the Holy Spirit. Hagiographers like to recount witnesses who once saw the saint digging ditches in his orchard while being held by angels like Elijah. So here you have the Old Testament model of the prophet represented in images. Where is it? This is a typical representation, Elijah-like representation of the saint who is being fed by angels. Here you have the angels giving him food and allowing him to work the land. The hagiographer Luis Muñoz succinctly captured the nature of Lopez's communication with the divine as a permanent imprint on the heart. Muñoz chose Lopez as a model for his patron, the Archbishop Palafox, to imitate the image of the heart with a crucified Christ carved in it, the permanence of the divine beside the saint. Again, this notion of print, an engraving as a representation of the presence of God in the body. The life and works of Gregorio Lopez confound all the paradigms scholars used to interpret literacy, print culture, cosmopolitanism, and the public sphere. Lopez was a layman with no access to libraries, Latin, or any institution of learning. He had spent most of his adult life in the backwaters of the imperial frontier. He nevertheless became one of the most accomplished biblical scholars, cosmographer, and physicians of colonial Mexico. Lopez never traveled mystically over the surface of the earth, like Sor Maria Agreda by vocation. Yet he was known for his command of global cosmographies and was capable of producing a mappa mundi and a globe via the supernatural force of the Holy Spirit acting through angels. By the way, his interpretation of Book of Revelation is eerily modern. It is not a typological, allegorical interpretation of Revelation, as most interpretations of Revelation tended to be up until recently, but it's a literal interpretation of Revelation and historical interpretation of Revelation, in which he argues like Elaine Pagon did a couple of years ago as a text that best reveals the tensions and contradictions of Roman history, the different emperors, the rise of Christianity, and the fight between Christianity and Rome. That is the way he interprets Revelation. It could be read today as a modern text easily. So the guy is very, very, very well acquainted with classical history, with the Roman history in particular, and creates a very unique intellectual product that has been completely forgotten. And this is what actually impressed Arce Diaz, the theologian, the foremost theologian of Mexico, the most important university theologian in Mexico, who wrote this treatise on popular prophets and the importance of the illiterate, the idiot, in interpretation of in biblical hermeneutics. Via the supernatural force of the Holy Spirit acting through angels, God spoke through this living idiot, saint, not by means of visions, revelation, and prophecy, but through the plain language of mathematics, astrology, medicine, and ecclesiastical scholarship. And it all made sense in the eye of his contemporaries all over Christendom, from Mexico to Madrid to Rome. The history of the making of saints like Maria de la Concepción and Gregorio Lopez challenge historians to rethink what the learned and the early modern period understood literacy and print culture to be, and to reconsider the paths through which information circulated to create communities throughout the world. Again, the point that I'm trying to make is Gregorio Lopez and his life and interpretations in Mexico had a phenomenal impact on Catholic biblical hermeneutics in Rome through the text of Arce. And I'm done. Any questions?